The Beast of Gévaudan was a cannibal who killed people in the French province of Gévaudan from 1764 to 1767. Not in the deepest prehistoric darkness, but in the 18th century, when the state already knew how to calculate taxes, print papers, and feign control. Then something wolf-like appears in the countryside, and this entire orderly human system begins to creak like a cheap door under a paw. The first known victim was 14-year-old Jeanne Boulet. In the summer of 1764, she was found dead near the village of Saint-Étienne-de-Lugdères. Things got worse from there. The beast attacked women, teenagers, children, shepherds, and people on paths and near fields. It didn't target livestock, although there were livestock around. It took people. This is where any normal brain begins to malfunction. The predator ignores more familiar prey and chooses a creature that will later write reports, dispatch soldiers, and summon the royal huntsman. A very inconvenient prey, it would seem. But a dead person doesn't care how inconvenient he is on paper. Witnesses described the beast differently. A huge wolf, a low body, a broad chest, reddish fur, a black stripe down its back, a large mouth, a tufted tail. The longer the months went by, the more the realistic descriptions became mingled with panic. And this is very human. When an unknown animal eats you, you quickly add extra teeth to it, right in your head. People need an image. If the killer is too ordinary, fear seems almost insulting. So the beast grows, inflates, becomes almost a myth. King Louis XV couldn't ignore such carnage. Soldiers, hunters, and professional marksmen were dispatched to the region. Thousands of men combed the forests and hills. They killed wolves, many wolves, but the attacks continued. A fine lesson in bureaucracy. You can shoot loudly at anything that looks like a problem, and still miss the problem itself. Newspapers spread the story across France, rumors multiplied, and villages lived in fear. Gévaudan became a place where every bush could be a trap. In 1765, the royal huntsman François Antoine killed a large wolf, and the authorities hastened to declare victory. Very convenient. The monster was dead. Honor was saved. The case could be closed, and the state could pretend it was once again stronger than the forest. But soon the attacks resumed. The impressive corpse turned out not to be the end, but a beautiful mistake. People began to find bodies again. Again, children did not return. Again, fear spread through the villages. In 1767, local hunter Jean Chastel killed an animal near Mount Mouchet. After that, the attacks ceased. The body was described as a large wolf, or wolf-like creature, but history never provided a definitive answer. A wolf? A hybrid? Several animals? An exotic predator that escaped from a private collection? Theories proliferated because people have a hard time accepting the gray truth. Sometimes, a catastrophe doesn't have to have a perfect solution. That's precisely what makes the Beast of Gévaudan so terrifying. It straddles the line between fact and hysteria. Real deaths, real dates, real villages, real children buried by their families. And on top of all that, human horror that turns a predator into legend, because the naked reality is too vile. Someone or something ate people for 3 years, while the authorities fired, peasants hid, and rumors made the beast grow. And frankly, the most unpleasant part here isn't a secret. The most unpleasant part is that the bodies no longer needed the answer. The Champawat tigress was a man-eating Bengal tigress, credited with 436 kills. 436. One cat. Not an army, not an epidemic, not a war, but a single predator with a striped skin and a broken jaw, who for several years turned villages in Nepal and northern India into silent cages for frightened people. It all began in western Nepal at the end of the 19th century. A tigress attacked people near villages, in the forest, on trails, places where people were supposed to simply live, gather firewood, herd cattle, and go about their business. But nature decided to play its dirty old trick. You think you're an intelligent species, capable of building houses, wearing clothes, and educating children, and then an animal weighing nearly 150 kilograms emerges from the bushes, and your entire civilization is abruptly reduced to a single question: will you make it in time? They tried to track her down. It didn't work. The Nepalese authorities even brought in the army, but instead of killing the tigress, they simply chased her across the border into India. A brilliant solution, of course. They didn't eradicate the problem. They sent it to neighbors as a live parcel, complete with claws. So the Champawat tigress ended up in Kumaon district and continued her hunt there. Villages began to live by a schedule of fear. People were afraid to leave their homes, work in the fields, or enter the forest. And the most vile thing, she often attacked during the day. Not at night, when you can console yourself with the darkness. During the day, in the light, when everyone can see everything, but no one can do anything. In 1907, Jim Corbett took up the case. He was 31 years old then. He wasn't some mythical stone-faced old man. He was a young hunter who went where others had already realized a simple thing. This tigress wasn't playing around. Corbett reached the Champawat area after yet another kill and began tracking the trail. The tigress had dragged her last victim, a young girl, off the trail. There were traces of blood, scraps of clothing, and bones. Yes, that's what a real story looks like, without the pretty packaging. Corbett organized a hunt with local residents. They made noise, shouted, and banged on objects, trying to force the tigress out of the forest and into the open. The risk was idiotic, but they had no other proper tools. When the tigress appeared, Corbett fired. Then again. She was wounded, but she kept moving. A predator with such a track record doesn't have to fall gracefully, as if in a theater. The final shot stopped her near Champawat. After examination, it became clear why she had turned to humans in the first place. The tigress had damaged fangs and a damaged jaw. Most likely, someone had shot her earlier. Ordinary prey had become too difficult. A deer must be caught, grabbed, and held. A human is easier, slow, soft, without claws, often alone. That's the whole terrifying philosophy, not an ancient curse, not demonic malice. Simply a wounded predator and human error, which then came to collect the price in bodies. The Sankabetsu bear was a man-eating brown bear from Hokkaido that, in December 1915, unleashed the deadliest series of bear attacks in Japanese history. 7 people died, and 3 more were injured. And all this happened not in some magical forest, but in the small village of Rokusen-sawa, where people were simply trying to survive amidst the snow, cold, and land that was only just being reclaimed from the wild. The bear was called Kesagake, a huge male, described as being about 3 meters long and weighing over 300 kilograms. So what they saw wasn't a fluffy, postcard-perfect symbol of nature, but a walking mountain of meat, claws, and bad mood. He'd been showing up near houses before the attacks, eating corn and getting too close to people. They tried to scare him off. Brilliant. Because if a huge brown bear has figured out where the food is, loud noises and human overconfidence are like thin paper against an axe. On December 9th, a bear broke into the Oda family's home. A woman and child were inside. It killed them and dragged their bodies into the forest. That's when the village should have realized the boundary between home and forest had disappeared. But people, as usual, first try to explain the catastrophe in a way that doesn't change their entire lives. They assembled a team, went searching, found tracks, and recovered the remains. The bear was gone. Everyone decided that perhaps the worst had already happened. A wonderful human habit, to see the abyss and tell yourself that it has probably had its fill. The next day, he returned. And not just returned, but came to the house where people had gathered after the first attack. The bear had attacked the Miyoke family's home, where women and children were hiding. Chaos erupted inside. People tried to escape, screaming, falling, getting in each other's way. And the bear did what a predator does when faced with cramped quarters, panic, and weak bodies. He killed several people, including children. This wasn't a hunt in the forest. This was the destruction of the very idea of shelter. There are walls. There is a roof. There is no protection. The authorities gathered hunters and armed men. They tried to ambush the bear, track it, and chase it down. But the snow, the forest, and fear worked better for it than any plans could have worked for humans. A mass evacuation began in the village. Those who had lived ordinary, difficult lives just the day before were now abandoning their homes because there was an animal nearby that had already tasted humans and was back for more. On December 14th, the hunter Yamamoto Heikichi, an experienced Matagi, finally tracked down Kesagake and shot him. Not an army, not a large headquarters. One man who understood bears better than anyone. When the carcass was examined, it became clear why he had inspired such terror. He was a full-grown, powerful, extremely dangerous male, awakened during the period when a normal bear would have hibernated. Hunger, habituation to human food, the proximity of a settlement, and the people's stupid belief that nature can simply be pushed aside had taken their toll. The Njombe lions were a pride of man-eaters from southern Tanganyika, now Tanzania, and are credited with one of the most horrific series of lion attacks on humans. According to the best estimates, they killed hundreds of people between 1932 and 1947, with some sources putting the figure as high as 1,500. Yes, 1,500. At first, the brain tries to reject the number. Too many, too dirty, too much like war, only instead of an army, it's a family of cats with teeth. It wasn't just one lion who went off the rails and started snatching people at night. It was a group of lions, a pride, who had turned hunting humans into a regular practice. Now that's a whole new level of horror. A single man-eater is a disaster. Several lions working together, passing on the habit to each other and teaching their young. That's the meat economy of the savannah. Cold, practical, moralless. People in the Njombe area lived with this for years. Not just one scary season, not a few weeks of panic. Years. Lions attacked villagers, those walking the trails, working, returning home, gathering food, going about their normal lives. Normal, until a pride shows up and decides that humans are easy prey. Slow, predictable, often unarmed. Nature doesn't write treatises. It calculates energy expenditure. And if the prey walks on two legs and has poor night vision, congratulations, you're on the menu. The most vile thing about Njombe's history isn't just the sheer number of deaths, but how long it lasted. Local legends linked the lions to a sorcerer named Matamula Mangera. Many believed the animals were under his control. And here, the human brain once again reveals its old flaw. When reality is too terrifying, it tries to explain it away with magic. Because accepting that lions, who have learned to eat people, are simply wandering around is psychologically nearly impossible. Superstition became not a decoration, but a hindrance. People were less helpful to those trying to stop the attacks. George Rushby, a British hunter and gamekeeper, took up the case. He later wrote that Njombe's lions behaved in an unusually organized manner. He said they would pass kills to each other, carry the body further into the undergrowth, and work as if they had a shared, dirty protocol. Of course, some of these stories could have been overlaid with hunting drama. People love to exaggerate the horror, especially when the horror is already overwhelming. But the basic fact remains. The pride really did have to be systematically exterminated, one animal at a time. Roshby tracked them, set ambushes, used bait, and gathered information from the locals. It wasn't a beautiful duel between man and beast, more like a long cleanup after a catastrophe that had been labeled anything but a direct threat for too long. Lions don't disappear because of rumors. They aren't deterred by prayers, taboos, or campfire arguments. They're stopped by bullets, an understanding of predator behavior, and a willingness to look at the problem without the mystical fog in their heads. The Jersey Shore shark attacks were a series of man-eating attacks off the coast of New Jersey in the summer of 1916. Over the course of 12 days, 4 people died, and 1 survived with serious injuries. And this whole nightmare happened not in the remote ocean, where at least a person would honestly trespass on someone else's territory, but near resorts, beaches, hotels, and people who believed the sea should act like a giant bathtub for vacationers. On July 1st, a shark attacked Charles Van Sant near Beach Haven. He was swimming near the shore, surrounded by people and a dog, on an ordinary summer evening. Then, the water turned red. He was pulled out, but his injuries were too severe. The man had come on vacation and found himself in a story that made the American public view the ocean not as a pretty postcard, but as a giant mouth with no instructions. On July 6th, Charles Bruder, a hotel employee, died near Spring Lake. He had swum farther from shore, and a shark attacked him so viciously that lifeguards didn't immediately understand what they were seeing. People on the beach watched from the shore as a typical resort day devolved into a brutal absurdity. Here you have the lounge chairs, the sun, decent suits, and talk of the weather. But in the water, the predator simply tears chunks out of people because it doesn't care about their vacation. After the second attack, panic spread along the coast. Newspapers fanned fear. Officials tried to reassure the public. Businesses were afraid of losing tourists. Of course, the 4 walls of bureaucracy only begin to budge when blood gets in the way of money. People were told that sharks almost never attack humans. Technically, that's true. A pleasant statistic until you're actually dragged underwater. On July 12th, the horror reached Matawan. And this was especially vile because the attacks occurred not in the open sea, but in a creek, inland, where the average person wouldn't expect a shark. First, a boy named Lester Stillwell died. Local tailor Stanley Fisher rushed to search for his body and also suffered fatal wounds. Later that day, a shark attacked teenager Joseph Dunn. He survived, but his leg was severely mangled. After that, the hunt began. Nets, boats, guns, explosives, crowds of people who suddenly decided that the ocean could be brought back into its place by brute force. A few days later, fisherman Michael Schleiser caught a large white shark in Raritan Bay. Human remains were found in its stomach, and that was enough for the public. The case was morally closed, although the debate continues. Some experts say it was a great white shark. Others believe it was a bull shark, since it can enter fresh water. The Jersey Shore sharks aren't scary for the sheer number of victims. History has seen far bloodier incidents. They're scary because they shatter the illusion of a safe beach. People like to think that if there's a hotel, a lifeguard, and a crowd of vacationers nearby, nature becomes the service staff. No. Sometimes, beyond the surf line, a predator lurks, uncaring about the room rate or how far you've traveled for a relaxing summer. The Turku wolves were cannibals from southwestern Finland who, in 1880 and 1881, killed 22 children. Not soldiers, not hunters, not adults who had ventured into the forest to prove their superiority. Children. The smallest, weakest, and most defenseless prey possible. Nature is sometimes not just cruel, it is also extremely frugal. The attacks occurred in the Turku region, among villages, fields, forest paths, and yards, where children did what children do anywhere: run errands, play, return home, help their families. And then wolves entered this ordinary life. Not just one random animal driven to the brink of starvation. Several wolves were involved, and they were attributed to a single series of attacks. They would appear suddenly, snatch a child, and disappear so quickly that adults often found not the child, but tracks. The most vile thing here isn't the blood. At least the blood is honest. The most vile thing is the helplessness. The adults understood the threat was near, but they couldn't post a guard at every child, every path, every edge of the forest. Village life doesn't stop on command. You have to carry water, herd animals, walk between houses, work. But for the wolves, one brief moment was enough. One mistake. One moment when a child was just a little too far from an adult. Authorities and locals organized manhunts. They offered rewards. They recruited hunters. People roamed the forest with guns, looking for tracks, combing attack sites. But a wolf isn't a large bear that can be spotted from afar. It's a gray machine on legs, designed for distance, patience, and disappearance. It doesn't have to fight. It simply retreats, waits, and then picks a weak spot again. To a human, it seems like they've organized a hunt. To a wolf, it's a noisy affair that can be waited out. Panic became a part of life. Children were afraid to be left alone. Any path between houses became a risk. Any forested area looked suspicious. And here's where the romantic image of the wolf as a noble beast breaks down. Nobility is a human label. A wolf doesn't need it. If the prey is small, slow, and unable to fight back, then the prey is ready. That's it. No philosophy, no evil intent, just hunger and a convenient target. The Panur leopard was a male man-eater from Kumaon, credited with more than 400 deaths. More than 400. When faced with such numbers, a defensive numbness usually kicks in. Oh well, one animal can't do that much. It can. Especially if this animal doesn't storm into a village like a rabid bull, but comes at night, quietly, without warning, and picks off the closest, weakest, slowest. Panur was located in the mountainous region of Almora, in northern India. The place is beautiful when viewed through the eyes of a tourist. But for the locals at the beginning of the 20th century, this beauty became a trap. Narrow paths, forest, slopes, villages where people lived literally wall to wall next to darkness. During the day, it was still possible to pretend the world was normal. After sunset, normalcy ended. The leopard came out to work. He didn't just attack random travelers. He studied human fear. When people stopped walking at night, he began approaching houses. When the doors closed, he looked for another way in. A window, a roof, a weak wall. A human dwelling quickly loses its prestige in such a story. We call it home, safety, privacy. The leopard saw a collection of thin materials, behind which lies warm meat. The reason for his cannibalism, according to Jim Corbett, was linked to an even more sordid human disaster. A cholera epidemic had previously swept through the region, and the bodies of the dead were sometimes left unburied or poorly buried. For a young predator, this was an easy meal. No risk, no chase, no hooves in the face. Then the epidemic subsided, the number of dead bodies decreased, but the habit remained. Nature does not hold moral meetings. If an animal is accustomed to eating a dead person, the next step to a living one is shorter than we like to think. Jim Corbett was called in to hunt the leopard. He already had a reputation for taking on such beasts when others would whisper, pray, and lock their doors. Corbett went through villages, gathering information, looking for tracks, and laying an ambush. He contracted malaria, but continued hunting. This is where the ugly situation really shines. One sick man with a gun against a beast that had held an entire region by the throat for years. Corbett used the goat as bait and took up a position in a tree. The sun had set. The forest began to speak its own unpleasant language. Birds, rustling sounds, silence where there shouldn't be silence. A leopard approached in the darkness and killed the goat. Corbett fired almost by ear. He wounded the animal. And then came the craziest part. The locals convinced him to follow the blood trail immediately, at night, with torches. A brilliant plan if you have an extra life in your pocket. When the leopard lunged out of the darkness, the torchbearers panicked. They ran, stumbled, and dropped their lights. Corbett found himself nearly blind in the face of a predator perfectly adept at killing in precisely such conditions. A few shots decided the matter. The leopard from Panhard fell, and the neighborhood, which had lived under the sentence of night for years, finally found a toothless silence beyond its doors. The most disturbing thing about this story isn't the death toll, although it's staggering. It's the mechanism. The disease leaves bodies. The predator adapts. People lock themselves in. The predator adapts. Then everyone wonders why nature behaves so inhumanely. Because nature wasn't human. The leopard of Panhard didn't hate people. He simply found the easiest way to survive. And the people realized, too late, that they had become not the masters of their villages, but prey with doorknobs. Osama the crocodile was a man-eating Nile crocodile from Uganda, credited with dozens of deaths on the shores of Lake Victoria. He was called Osama not because people wanted a catchy nickname, but because a sense of terror hung around him for years. Except without politics, slogans, or cameras. Just water, a boat, a person leaning too low, and the surface suddenly closing over them like a lid. From the early 1990s to the 2000s, this crocodile, according to local estimates, killed more than 80 people in the area around the villages near the lake. The exact number is difficult to verify. And here's the most disgusting thing. The crocodile doesn't leave a neat report. The fisherman went off alone. The boat returned empty. Clothes washed up on the shore. Sometimes a body part. Sometimes nothing at all. Water is excellent at erasing evidence. Very convenient for the predator, but disgusting for the people who then try to figure out who's gone. Osama didn't just grab people swimming. He targeted fishermen, children by the shore, people collecting water, those who lived with the lake every day because they had no other option. That's the dirty trap. A rich man might say, "Don't go near dangerous water." Excellent advice. But what if your food, your job, your water, and your life are right there? Then you go out every day to a place where an animal several meters long might lie beneath the surface and wait for a mistake. Locals said the crocodile had learned to strike boats from below, capsize them, and throw people into the water. Perhaps some of these stories stemmed from fear. It happens. But even if you strip away the unnecessary horror, the essence remains chilling. A large Nile crocodile is truly capable of attacking a boat, waiting in familiar spots, and exploiting human predictability. People take the same paths to the water. Boats leave at similar times. Children fill up with water wherever convenient. A predator doesn't need magic. It relies on its prey's habits. The scariest thing about a crocodile isn't its speed or its jaws, although the jaws themselves are a punishment for carelessness. The scariest thing is the silence. A lion roars. A bear breaks bushes. At least a leopard leaves tracks in the dust. The crocodile lies underwater, looking like part of the landscape. No drama, no warning. Just a brown line at the surface, and then a jerk, weight, teeth, and water instead of air. In 2005, Osama was finally captured by wildlife officials. He wasn't shot on the spot, as you'd expect in such stories. The crocodile was captured alive and sent to a farm, where he was kept as a breeding stock. Yes, it sounds almost mockingly calm. After dozens of deaths, the monster doesn't become a legendary trophy, but is moved to a fenced pond and continues to live under human supervision. Osama the crocodile isn't terrifying because he was some kind of supernatural monster. He's terrifying because he perfectly exploited the simple human dependence on water. We can build roads, telephones, cities, and complex security systems, but people still need to drink, eat, and work. And sometimes, by the shore, lies an ancient reptile that needs neither hatred nor anger, only patience. And one person who got too close. The spotted devil of Gumalapur was a man-eating leopard, credited with 42 deaths in the villages of Gumalapur and Devarabetta in southern India. 42. For a leopard, that's a monstrous statistic, because a leopard isn't a tiger, a lion, or a massive muscle machine. It's smaller, quieter, worse. It doesn't have to charge head-on. It comes as if it hadn't even existed a second ago. He was nicknamed the Spotted Devil, not for a beautiful legend, but for his behavior. He hunted at night, when the village turned into a collection of closed doors and backs wet with fear. People barricaded themselves in their houses after sunset, not even going out to relieve themselves. And here comes the nasty, everyday part, which people usually don't like to talk about. If an entire village is afraid to go outside, it quickly develops problems, not only with nerves, but also with sanitation. Nature doesn't crush them with pomp. It crushes them dirty, through fear, smell, disease, and sleepless nights. The leopard quickly figured out a simple thing. If food was hidden in a box, the box could be opened. It entered huts through walls, roofs, windows, and thatched partitions. Humans invented the house as protection. The leopard looked at this solution and apparently decided it was simply a soft package with meat inside. In one of the most horrific incidents, it killed all 4 people in one hut. No mysticism, just a predator who had learned to deal with human panic better than humans themselves. Kenneth Anderson, a hunter and writer who specialized in such man-eaters, was called in to hunt him. And even for him, it wasn't a simple stroll with a gun. The locals were almost uncooperative at first. They were afraid that any help to the hunter would only bring them even more trouble. Yes, logic often dies first in moments of terror. Anderson sat up all night, trying to lure the beast out, setting up bait, even setting up a dummy in the hut so the leopard would mistake him for a human. The leopard saw through the deception and left. Clever creature. Very clever. In the final battle, Anderson was saved not by heroic instinct, but by a small, almost mockingly absurd detail. A stray dog he'd picked up and named Nipper raised the alarm. The leopard appeared on the roof, vanished, then attacked again. Anderson managed to turn and fire. A few rifle shots stopped the animal in its tracks. That's how nightmares sometimes end. Not with a solemn speech, not with a grand plan, but with one frightened dog hearing death in the darkness just in time. After examining the body, Anderson found 2 Indian porcupine quills lodged between the toes of the leopard's right forepaw. The wound prevented it from hunting its usual, fast-moving prey. According to Anderson, before attacking living people, the animal may have also fed on the bodies of cholera victims left in the forest. The sloth bear of Mysore was a man-eater from southern India, and his story is especially disturbing because the word sloth bear sounds almost comical. It's as if we're talking about a strange, furry animal that digs around in anthills and doesn't bother anyone. And then it turns out that this clumsy bear killed 12 people and maimed more than 24 more in 1957. Face, skull, arms, chest. He hit where a person breaks the fastest. Sloth bears don't resemble the ideal predator of childhood fears at all. They don't look like a tiger, don't move like a leopard, and don't pack the weight of a huge brown bear. They're shaggy, strange-looking, with an elongated snout and long claws, designed for tearing apart termite mounds. Nature sometimes plays tricks like a sick engineer. It gave the animal the appearance of a comical old man in a fur coat, but added strength, speed, and a habit of attacking faces. Thank you. Very subtle. In the Mysore region, this bear began attacking people going about their daily business, walking along trails, working, returning home. They didn't enter the den with a torch, didn't try to bait the beast with a stick, didn't stage a heroic hunt. They simply lived near the territory of an animal whose normal mind, apparently, had broken down. Saw a person, lunged, ripped apart, sometimes killed. Sometimes left alive, but in such a way that the survivors bore the mark of that encounter for the rest of their lives. The most savage thing about sloth bears is their attack style. A tiger often kills quickly because it needs its prey. A leopard drags you aside. A crocodile pulls you into the water. But a sloth bear can simply explode with a short-range attack, knocking you down, tearing your skin, ripping off part of your face, and then running away. There's no logic to it, no clear scenario. It's as if nature had pressed the rage button and forgotten to put a stopper. Kenneth Anderson, already famous for stories of Indian man-eaters, was hunting the bear. He understood that this wasn't a tiger, which could be baited with the usual tactics. The sloth bear is unpredictable. It can walk heavily, almost lazily, and then a second later fly at a person like a black boulder with claws. And if the hunter miscalculates the distance, there's no time to correct it. There will be no second attempt, only a short dash and meat instead of a face. Anderson eventually tracked down the animal and shot it. After that, the attacks stopped. A dry phrase, convenient, almost sterile. But beyond it lie 12 dead, and people who were never the same after their encounter with this bear. And here one feels like rudely poking a finger at the very idea of nature being nice. No, it's not nice, it's indifferent. One species eats termites until all is well. Then something breaks: pain, age, injury, stress, hunger, human closeness. And this strange, shaggy beast becomes a problem that has to be solved with a bullet. The lion of Mfue was a man-eating lion from the Luangwa River Valley in Zambia who killed 6 people in 1991. Not in the colonial era, not in old hunting tales, not in the dusty diary of a man with a pith helmet. Almost modern history. There were already cars, telephones, tourist camps, proper roads. And next to villages, a huge lion roamed, calmly taking people, as if civilization had accidentally forgotten to close the door. He was a male, but almost maneless, so at first the locals might have suspected lionesses from a neighboring pride. A terrible mistake. A very human one. They saw the wrong head shape, the wrong silhouette, jumped to conclusions, and started looking in the wrong places. Meanwhile, the real killer continued to stalk the area. A large, heavy male, strangely naked for a lion, over 3 meters long and weighing almost 250 kilograms. Not a symbol of royalty. Not a golden image for tourists. A huge feline carcass that becomes almost silent at night. The first attacks began in August. One boy was walking down the road at night with another boy. One ran away. The other died. All that remained of him were scraps of clothing and parts of his skull. That's all the romance of African nature, if you take away the beautiful music and advertising photos of sunsets. Then a lion broke into a woman's house on the edge of the village. He didn't sneak up on the herd. He didn't choose the antelope. He came to where the man thought he was inside. Safe. Behind the wall. Behind the door. Funny, right? The door works as long as the man is outside. When the lion is outside, the door becomes a polite request. There was a case of a boy who was attacked by a lion at night while walking to visit a friend. A gamekeeper scared the animal off with a shot into the air, but the child still died from his wounds. The terrifying detail: the lion wasn't just attacking random people anymore. It was checking out the village, its routes, its weak points, its habits. Where people wander at night, where houses are closer to the bushes, where people are left alone. A predator doesn't have to be smarter than a person in everything. It only needs to be smarter in one thing: how to get within striking distance. The most vile story happened after the last victim, a woman named Jesslyn. The lion dragged her out of her round hut, killed her, and the next day returned and took a bag of her clothes from the house. Then he carried the bag around the village. People saw him walking around with it, as if showing off a trophy. Of course, the brain immediately wants to call it abuse. It's easier that way. But perhaps the beast simply smelled the human scent and reacted to it. And that doesn't make it any easier. In fact, it makes it worse. What people perceived as almost supernatural audacity could have been ordinary biology. Hunter Wayne Hosek and professional hunter Charles Bucas set up ambushes. They used hippopotamus meat as bait, hid in cover, changed locations, and tried to conceal their scent. The lion was no dumb target for a heroic photo. He avoided people with guns, but found those without. Finally, Hosek shot him behind the left shoulder blade. That was the end of the series. After the lion's death, researchers discovered a severe jaw injury. Such pain could have prevented it from hunting normal prey: buffalo, zebra, and large ungulates. Humans, however, are softer, slower, less protected. Today, the stuffed lion from Mfue stands at the Field Museum in Chicago, alongside the lions of Tsavo. The Rudraprayag leopard was a man-eater from the Indian Himalayas, credited with 125 deaths over 8 years. 125 people. And this isn't a tiger, which at least looks like a walking disaster. The leopard is smaller, more agile, quieter. It doesn't come with warning. It simply appears where a moment ago there was an ordinary night, an ordinary house, an ordinary person who thought walls had meaning. The first recorded attack was in 1918 in the Rudraprayag area, in what is now the Indian state of Uttarakhand. The location itself sounds like a trap for a weary person. Mountain trails, villages on the slopes, pilgrimage routes to sacred sites, forests close to homes. People didn't travel these roads for adventure. They lived, traded, prayed, carried goods, and returned home. and then one leopard decided that humans had become too easy prey. He attacked at night. Of course, at night, because a leopard is a near-perfect machine for the dark. Soft paws, a quick dash, the body disappears into the bushes, and people stand with torches and try to figure out where normal life ended. After the first kills, residents began locking themselves in. Logical. Door, bolt, roof, family inside, a small human fortress. But the leopard quickly demonstrated how ridiculous our architectural self-confidence can be. He broke down doors, climbed through windows, penetrated roofs made of lightweight materials, dragged people out of their homes, as if the house weren't a protection, but merely a box with a poorly secured lid. In some villages, life came to a standstill after sunset. People were afraid to go outside, even for the simplest needs. And that's where the horror becomes mundane, sticky, humiliating. Not a heroic battle with a predator. You're simply afraid to open the door, because spotted death might be waiting behind it. The authorities tried to solve the problem. Squads of soldiers, Gurkhas, local hunters, rewards for killing animals. A magnificent array of human confidence. Only the leopard continued to live, hunt, and disappear. It knew the trails better than officials, the forest better than soldiers, human habits better than humans themselves. The predator doesn't argue with the system. It simply bypasses it at night. In 1926, Jim Corbett took up the hunt. The hunt lasted for weeks. Corbett collected stories, checked attack sites, lay in ambush, followed tracks, and waited. It wasn't a beautiful duel. It was a grueling hunt for the beast that had taught people to fear the dark for 8 years. Finally, Corbett shot the leopard near Rudraprayag, and the attacks ceased. Corbett attributed his cannibalism to the flu epidemic of 1918. Many people died in the mountains then, and bodies couldn't always be cremated properly. Some remains became available food for predators. For the leopard, this was a shortcut. First the dead, then the living. Yes, it sounds disgusting, but at least it's fair. The lions of Tsavo were two man-eating lions from Kenya who, in 1898, halted the construction of the Uganda Railway. Two males, almost maneless. Not the crowned, fairy tale beasts of safari advertising, but lean, strong, brazen predators who would come to workers' camps at night and drag people right out of their tents. The construction took place through the Tsavo River region. The British colonial administration was pushing the railway through East Africa, because empires are always fond of drawing lines on a map and pretending that nature must obey the blueprint. There were many workers, Indian laborers, African porters, engineers, and guards. The people slept in camps, tired, dirty, in the heat, among the bushes and the sounds of the night. And then lions began to come to the camp. At first, one lion would take one victim. Then both began to enter the camp. A tent is a shelter for a man. For a lion, it's a cloth wrapping. The predator would approach in the darkness, grab the man, and drag him into the bushes. That's it. No great battle. No chance to rise up and win. You sleep, and in a second, you're gone. In the morning, the others see tracks, blood, torn fabric, and understand that the next night is still there. The death toll is still debated. John Henry Patterson, an engineer and hunter who oversaw the construction, wrote of over 100 dead. Modern research offers more conservative estimates, suggesting around 30 people were actually eaten by lions. But do you know what that qualifier sounds like for dead people? Absolutely not. Even 30 people isn't a statistical trifle. That's 30 times a human camp turned into a feeding trough. The workers began to scatter. The construction site had practically ground to a halt. And then the imperial machine suddenly discovered that two animals could be more powerful than schedules, orders, and superiors. Patterson tried to catch the lions using ambushes, platforms, bait, and traps. The lions avoided all of this with an unsettling confidence. They weren't demons. They were worse. Normal, intelligent predators who quickly figured out where the easiest meal lay. Patterson killed his first lion in December 1898. The second held out longer and took several hits before it too was stopped. After that, the attacks ceased and construction continued. A very convenient ending to the report. The animals were killed. The road was being built. Order was restored. Only, in reality, order was a thin film, torn apart by the claws of two cats over the course of several months. Scientists still debate why they became man-eaters. One lion was found to have serious dental problems, and by that time, the region's usual prey population was already changing. Livestock diseases, hunting, human camps, and wounded and deceased workers. All of this could have created the perfect, muddy corridor for cannibalism. Gustav was a man-eating Nile crocodile from Burundi, a huge reptile from the Ruzizi River and Lake Tanganyika region, credited with dozens, and according to local accounts, even hundreds of human deaths. And here's where we need to immediately remove the fairy tale dust. No one kept the exact number in a sealed iron file. A crocodile doesn't sign an attack report. The man disappeared into the water. The boat returned empty. The family waited, then waited no longer. That's it. Gustav didn't become famous because he was captured and measured like a museum exhibit. He was feared because he appeared again and again in places where people couldn't simply stop living. Fishermen took to the water. Women and children came to the shore. Villages depended on the river as much as a person depends on air. And somewhere there, beneath the murky surface, lay a predator that only needed one pounce. Gustav was described as an unusually large Nile crocodile. They said it was over 5 meters long, had a massive head, had scars on its body, and even bullet holes. Locals said it had been shot at but survived. Of course, this quickly led to the legend of its nearly bulletproof skin. The human brain thrives on such explanations. It's easier to believe in a monster than to accept that ordinary biology is already terrifying enough. The most disturbing thing about Gustav wasn't his size. A large crocodile is immediately frightening, no imagination required. What's worse is that his behavior didn't fit neatly into a convenient pattern. He was said to have attacked for more than just food. There were stories that he killed and dumped the bodies. Proving this is difficult, and there's no need to pretend to be an all-knowing prophet with a microphone. But the very fact that people for years linked disappearances to him demonstrates the scale of the fear. His name became practically a diagnosis for the entire coast. In the early 2000s, French naturalist Patrice Fay tried to catch Gustav. They built a huge cage trap, used bait, cameras, and surveillance. It sounds impressive, almost like a victory of reason over an ancient maw. But the crocodile isn't obligated to participate in human plans. He didn't go where he was invited. Or he approached, but then left. Or he simply looked at this entire aquatic contraption as just another example of the stupidity of land creatures. Attempts to catch him became part of the myth. Gustav became living proof of a nasty fact. A person can build a trap, bring equipment, name the beast, make a film, write an article, and still end up empty-handed on the bank. Because a river isn't a stage. A river isn't obligated to deliver its finale on the right day. The Chowgar tigers were a pair of man-eaters from Kumaun, an elderly Bengal tigress and her nearly adult cub, credited with 64 kills. Not a single animal with a broken psyche. Not a random predator who once tried humans and went down a crooked path. There was a family dynamic here, a mother and a young tiger. Nature, as always, is unsentimental. If prey is convenient, it can not only be eaten, but also passed on to the next generation as a skill. The attacks took place in the 1920s in the Chowgar region, amid mountain villages, forests, and trails. People there didn't live in a sterile landscape of beautiful hills, but in a place where every trip for water, firewood, or livestock could end in the bushes. Tigers wandered between villages, appearing now in one place, now in another, and locals couldn't figure out where to expect the next attack. A very convenient tactic for a predator, but a completely rotten lottery for humans. The old tigress was the pair's greatest terror. Corbett later discovered that her fangs and claws were damaged, Her teeth were worn down, and her body no longer functioned like a normal hunter of wild prey. Now we're turning on the cold mechanics. The deer must be caught. The boar must be held. The ungulate can strike, run away, and break the last of your health. Humans are weaker, slower, often walk alone, and are overly confident in being the dominant species on the planet. A costly mistake. The young tiger, apparently, learned alongside its mother. And that's what makes the story especially vile. Cannibalism here appears not as a one-off incident, but as a family tradition. The mother shows where the prey is, how to approach it, when to attack, where to drag the body. The cub watches. It remembers. Nature doesn't lecture. It teaches through meat. Villagers began to live in constant fear. Fields, paths, forest edges, everything became suspicious. When there's only one predator, people at least try to mentally map the danger. When there are two, the map is torn. One might be far away, the other close by. One distracts rumors, the other takes the person. It didn't necessarily happen that way every time, but that's how fear works. It adds even more intelligence to the animals, because otherwise, it's impossible to explain why people keep disappearing. Jim Corbett had to return to this hunt several times. He didn't find the tigers in one beautiful evening, like in a cheap story about a hero with a rifle. There were long searches, tracks, bait, false expectations, village stories that had to be filtered because panic makes witnesses inaccurate. Finally, Corbett found the tigress near the village of Kala Agar. The distance was both comical and terrifying. Just a few steps between man and the animal that had been collecting victims for years. Corbett shot the old tigress, and later killed the young one as well. After that, the attack stopped. A dry ending, very convenient for retelling. But behind him were 64 people, and a region that lived for several years with the feeling that the forest had become a sentient enemy. Except it wasn't. The forest simply provided shelter for two predators who had found the easiest way to feed.